I'll kind of introduce myself and I can start talking a little bit about the project, and then, when the individuals are ready, I can share those. So I'm Callin. Thank you for inviting me here today. I'm excited to be here. I'm going to talk about the Madison Passenger Rail Station Study. And this is my first ARP type meeting in a long time, but at the beginning of my career I did some work with Passenger Rail in Michigan, and I did some work with MARP. So I'm excited to be working back in Passenger Rail. I joined the city of Madison about 6 months ago. Part of what attracted me to this position was a specific project, being able to manage it. So I'm serving as a project manager for the city of Madison for this. And yeah, I'm just really excited to continue working on this and hopefully connect with you all more moving forward. So just a little bit of background about the station study. We are looking at, we're at the point in the study, Madison Passenger Rail Station. And why are we looking at a station? Well, I think Rich kind of provided that background, and I think many of you are familiar, but because of the corridor ID planning grant that was, awarded to the state of Wisconsin, we have, the funding to make a plan to bring passenger rail to Madison. So back to passenger rail, obviously you all know there was a time where we thought we were going to have passenger rail in Madison again, and it didn't happen. So we're revamping that whole effort in partnership with WisARP and Amtrak, and we are also hearing a lot of enthusiasm from the community on this project. So we are trying to get our ducks in a row so we can identify a station location. So when WisARP is working on their project to plan and do the corridor development, they have a location for us in Madison. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the project schedule and service development update. I think I'll probably breeze through that because that's really Rich's piece. And I'll talk about the potential sites in a little more detail and have maybe a couple of minutes for questions, but we can also have questions at lunch too if folks are interested in just kind of having a little bit more of a conversation about the Madison stations. So just really briefly, kind of our process for the study was that we began by identifying these general station corridor areas around the city where we thought it could make sense to have a station. So we looked at where the rail line's coming in, what is the land use around those areas, and we kind of identified these general areas, and we evaluated those and came out with 3 kind of general areas that we're interested in looking at, and those are downtown near the First Street area, which is near the future Madison Public Market, and then on the near north side, which is near the former Oscar Mayer plant. So we're kind of looking in those general areas, and then within those, we identified 8 specific sites to really dive into, and that's what we're working on right now. So out of this study, we will have a recommended site, and we'll also probably have a Plan B and maybe a Plan C site as well. So obviously with this study, we are identifying a site that will potentially serve rail in several years, hopefully not too many years, but based on Rich's timeline with WisARP and getting the corridor and the route development happening, we're going to be looking at a few years out, so we're not quite ready to break ground yet. So what we'll have is this is our kind of our identified recommended site, and if for various reasons that site is not feasible when we're actually ready to develop it, we'll kind of be able to look to our Plan B or Plan C site. These are those 4 different corridors that Rich talked about, and the route that we're looking at is the route in the green. So extending the Hiawatha from Chicago to Milwaukee and then over to Madison and then eventually up to the Twin Cities. So what are we talking about when we're talking about a station? As you are all well aware, there's lots of different forms and fashions that Amtrak stations can come in, but generally we are looking at some kind of a building or a space within a building, a platform and track, ideally about 700-foot long platform, but that can be shorter depending on the constraints of the site. We are, of course, looking at how are people getting to the site, how are they getting around the site, making sure all ADA requirements are met, and ideally that the site is expansively accessible, not just meeting those bare minimum requirements, but then we're also having to consider things like train layover and servicing, and can that happen on site if it does need to happen, or do we need to identify another location for that to happen? So our service assumptions, because as Rich discussed, they are still in the planning phase for the route, but we have to have some assumptions to kind of have somewhat of an idea of what the station will, what it will need to kind of handle. So we are generally assuming about 4 to 6 trains per day. We are assuming that it will be traditional passenger rail service, so up to 79 to 110 miles per hour. That the amenities will generally match what we have right now on the Hiawatha, and that we are also assuming, based on the application for the corridor ID programming, that there will be probably a phased implementation of the route that goes through Madison. So probably first extending to Madison and then eventually making that connection north. We're not exactly sure how that will happen. That's something that WisARP will figure out when they're doing their planning, but trying to understand that there may be a need for Madison to be a terminal station, at least in the short term. So thinking about how will the train be serviced, and will it need to have a layover location because it is a terminal station. Who are we thinking about as potential users? Well, we are kind of taking our cue from the existing Hiawatha. We do think it will sort of match that, and that is also what we've heard from Amtrak, is that's what they think it will match. But we're thinking it will be a combination of probably business travelers, leisure travelers, students' families, probably some commuters, but that won't be the bulk of the ridership. And then also we're thinking about making sure, we're thinking about people of all ages, all abilities, all backgrounds, and how are they going to use this station and want to connect to and from it. So I think the key challenge with this study is really balancing a whole lot of different priorities. So the city of Madison has a variety of different priorities. Our community members have different priorities. Amtrak, WisARP, all these different organizations that we're working with and different stakeholders. But the key things are, of course it has to meet the train access and operational needs. It has to accommodate those program elements. But then we also have to think about the site itself, and is it feasible to own or acquire it? The city of Madison is not interested or planning to use eminent domain for a site. So we have to have some kind of, if there is a private party ownership situation, it has to be sort of a partnership to make that happen. We also want to minimize environmental impacts and maximize ridership, and looking at ways that we can ensure that access to the station is equitable, whether that be by different types of people or different modes of transportation, and even different parts of the Madison region. And then we also want to think about economic development and how can we make the station a really great place? How can it be activated? How can it be used throughout the day? Maybe there's other uses nearby that keep people around, even if they're not maybe even taking a train. Or maybe if there's a place to wait, or a place to wait to pick someone up. Just kind of thinking about all those things, making it really more of a place than just a station building that people are only using for one purpose. A little bit about our evaluation criteria that we're using for the sites. So again, these kind of are matching those priorities I just went over. We're looking at those things. We're looking at proximity to people, jobs, and destinations to get a feel for what the ridership potential might be. We're looking at access and multimodal connectivity, and then we're also looking at the land use and development, both of the site immediately that we're considering, and also the site around, the area around the site, also what's there today and what's planned to be there, and what are some of the development trends that we're seeing in the different parts of the city. This is a map of the potential station sites. So if you're not super familiar with Madison, we do have 4 sites on the downtown area, kind of on the isthmus itself. So Monona Terrace being one of the sites, that was one of the stations that was considered in the 2010 effort. We're looking at a site near there at Blair Street. There's also a site at Livingston Street, which is currently owned by MG&E, and there's a large city-owned parking garage really close to that site. And then we're also looking at a site off Baldwin Street, which would be an expansion of a park. The First Street corridor will be home to the future Madison Public Market, and that is currently under construction. So we're considering a site that would actually be shared with the Madison Public Market, and then we're also considering a site that's kind of key corner to that site. That right now is housing warehouse buildings, and is, would be a potential purchase that the city could make. And then in the former Oscar Mayer plant area, so those yellow dots up on the map, we're looking at 2 locations, one at Commercial Avenue and one at Eberg Avenue. So just kind of looking first at proximity to people. So which station location has the most people near it or the most people with easy access to it. And so it does kind of go, you know, starting downtown and moving east and north as far as how many people are nearby, with the most people being near those downtown sites. And then we see a very similar trend when we look at jobs, and we are looking at jobs both because, yes, there's that potential for business-to-business travel, and maybe some commuter travel, but really also just a sense of the commercial activity near those sites. So kind of the same trend there. And then we also got data from Destination Madison, which is Madison's visitor bureau, and we looked at what are the top visitor destinations in Madison. And where are people coming from and going to? Well, first of all, people are coming from Milwaukee, Chicago, and Minneapolis. Those are the top 3 areas that people are coming to Madison from. That's a pretty good sign when the route is expected to go from those locations. So I think that's a good thing. And we are also, you know, of course, looking within the city. So where are kind of the hot spots of destinations? And it is where you would probably expect. There's a lot of spots near downtown. UW-Madison is a huge destination. Easttown and Westtown Mall are on there. They're not shown on this map, but they're also top destinations, as well as some of the more outer reaching parks and different venues like Warner Park and things like that. And then we also think about visitor access when they get to Madison. So one of those data points is hotels. So if you are coming as a visitor to Madison and you are gonna be coming on the train and you're gonna be staying in a hotel, you're probably gonna wanna be able to walk to that hotel. So we wanted to look at how many hotel rooms are within about a half mile, which is generally kind of like the maximum walking distance most people would consider. And as you can see from this graphic, you know, there are multiple hotel rooms near Monona Terrace and Blair Street, right around a little bit under, between 1,000 and 1,500 hotel rooms. And then it starts to go down the further east and north you get, with Livingston Street and Baldwin Street having access to some, but then as you get to those other sites, not being able to walk to any hotels right now. So this is an overview of each site. So this is just kind of an orthographic view of each site. So you've got Monona Terrace, and this site would have the platform extending under the parking garage of Monona Terrace, as you can see where that kind of yellow highlight is. And right now, at least, the plan would be that the station space would be an extension of the Department of Administration building. That building that you see that yellow highlight nearby. So that's kind of the general layout that we're thinking for Monona Terrace. Again, very conceptual at this point. And then this is just a plan view. So nice things about this site is that you can accommodate that large platform there. Obviously, you have that high proximity to jobs and people and destinations. We'd be looking at having a new passenger siding at all of the sites to accommodate the train as it's pulling in and out. Kind of conceptual, but generally we're thinking this site that the station and waiting area would be incorporated into that DOA building or be an extension of that building. And then the Blair Street site, so this is currently a mixed-use development called the Gateway Mall. And the concept for this is that a station could be part of a redevelopment of this site. So that's generally what we're thinking for this site. And then this also has that high proximity to people, jobs, and destinations. But there's also a lot going on at this site. So looking at maybe what that layout of that site might look like, we think we could probably fit about a 500-foot platform at this site. Again, having that passenger rail siding, potentially having some other new development tied in with the station, shared maybe in the same building or maybe in the same general area. And just thinking about, you know, other parts of the site, like we've got the Capital City Trail coming through here, so trying to understand how that might work. And also the potential of the Blount Street crossing would be blocked when the train is serving the station, so we would need to look at different options to address that. At Livingston Street, I mentioned this site is owned by MG&E right now. That building that you kind of see right there, that's the large parking garage that's owned by the city of Madison. And again, we have the potential for another street being blocked with this site, so something else to consider, but also good proximity to people, jobs, and destinations with this site. This site we think could accommodate about a 580-foot platform, so a decent length, but not quite getting to that ideal 700-foot length to accommodate a full train that we would expect that would be serving Madison. And then the Baldwin Street site, this one would be an expansion of what's now McPike Park. The site itself is currently a warehouse building, so we'll be redeveloping that and basically turning it into a station and then more park space. This site from a rail operations perspective is challenging given the switch in that location, so that's something that we're considering, as well as trying to decide whether the park use kind of makes sense with the station there. I think we've got mixed opinions on that right now. The First Street site, so this is the one I mentioned would be shared with the future Madison Public Market. So this one would have, right now the idea would be the station would be a separate building, but on the same site as the market. And then having a passenger track that would actually have a street segment to serve a platform. But again, challenges with this site from kind of an engineering and construction standpoint, as well as challenges with parking at this location. So I didn't really talk about parking in the other ones, but in the downtown sites, there are public parking garages very near both Blair Street and, well, particularly Monona Terrace. There's a very large parking garage across the street that we think would be utilized for parking. But here we would be having to identify probably a new site for parking because the Madison Public Market would be expected to use all of their parking, and they might even be underparked, so to speak, right now. So there's some concerns about that. Johnson Street, we are looking at, this is the one that's sort of kitty corner to the existing, or the future public market site, which is under construction. And right now, our understanding is the current owners of the site aren't interested in partnering with us on a development, so it would be the city of Madison would actually purchase this site if we decided to move forward with this. So we're evaluating that right now and trying to get a better understanding of what that might look like. We're also investigating options for just one of these parcels, for example. So the area shown in red are one parcel, the area shown in yellow are another parcel, and trying to also discuss how parking might work. But this site is nice because it would accommodate a full 700-foot platform, and we also think the train could be serviced at the yard, which is just on the other side of the track. So we think that there's a lot of opportunities from a rail operations perspective, but you don't have quite that proximity to people, jobs, and destinations here that you do downtown. And then Commercial Avenue, this site, as we've been evaluating it, is kind of coming out as probably a less likely opportunity just because there is actually a proposed development on this site now, and it's a multifamily housing apartment building, and so having the timing, first of all, probably won't work out, but having, that also multiple different housing developments are proposed right near this area, so having kind of that high concentration of housing without maybe some commercial activity to support the station, we're not sure how well that will work. We are still evaluating it though, and the developers were interested in talking with us, so it does seem like, it's not a completely closed door, but probably one of the less likely sites that we would be moving forward with here. The last one is this Apr6 Avenue site. So this was the former site of Madison Metro's North Transfer Point. So the Metro is the city's bus transit service. So they had a transfer point here, which was kind of some shelters, and this is where multiple buses would come in and serve this part of the city. They have done kind of a redesign of their network and now are not using this transfer point. So this would be kind of a redevelopment of this site for the purposes of a station. Again, this could be a multi-use development, it could be a partnership with a perspective, or I'm sorry, that full platform length, but it doesn't necessarily have, again, that proximity. So again, it's kind of about balancing those different priorities and trying to figure out what is most important for the community and for the city and for the viability of the service. So generally the timeline that we're kind of working with, and we've been talking with WisDOT a lot, and this is very much kind of subject to change, but as Rich mentioned, they're working on that federal grant agreement right now, with the corridor scoping, planning, and development planning to occur over the next about 4 years, which gives us, the potential design and construction timeframe of 2028 to 2031. And so that's kind of the timeframe we're working with, and that's why we're looking at multiple different options that we can have a few things kind of on the back burner, depending on what sites may or may not end up changing hands, or different things might happen over the next 4 to 6 years. And so kind of what's next for the study right now, we have been meeting with various stakeholders. I've been telling my coworkers I'm kind of on the speaking tour, so I've been talking to a lot of different groups and trying to get feedback from a variety of different groups. We did some public engagement at the beginning of the year, and we will be doing more public engagement later this spring. We do plan to have the study wrapped up kind of in the middle of 2024. I'm hoping for later this spring or early summer that we'll be able to have a recommended site. And basically our next step is really continuing to coordinate with WisDOT, with Amtrak, and even with the other communities along the route. So we know that this is only successful if this whole program is successful. So, something we're trying to do is see how we can engage with different groups like yourselves, or even become involved in more of kind of the coalition to expand passenger rail, and what can Madison do and what can our role be, because as a city, we're really committed to doing what we can to move this forward. And I think, Rich, you talked about funding from different communities, and I think Madison's kind of in that realm where, we've said, we will contribute to the local match. And so I think, we want to do what we can. And I know the question came up, what can, how can we support each other? And I think, the more we can stay connected to what your group is doing, the more we can kind of help move this effort forward.
I want to ask a question, maybe more finance. And obviously, they have to make decisions and study completion to set aside figured costs. But are you thinking that you will also go back to other federal funding and/or maybe monies from WisDOT and the passenger rail station improvement program? I mean, it's a $60,000 grant, but is there an anticipation there will be other funding efforts that have to be made?
Potentially, but I will say right now, the way we're kind of thinking about funding is that the station development in Madison, that the city of Madison is funding, would hopefully count toward a local match for the overall project. So obviously, if there's federal money in there, that wouldn't count for the local match, but that's hypothetically how we're thinking of it. But I think at this point, we're also looking at, different partners that might be involved, different multi-use developments that could be created as part of it. And I think we're just trying to be creative about how can we support the local match while also supporting funding the station in Madison and having, have it be kind of a really rich, interesting place and not just kind of minimal budget. So I think it's kind of that balance, but I do think we want to support the local match through the development of the station if we can. So that really concludes my presentation.